So let's have a look at automation, where you could say there's huge scope for innovation within the world of automation. The low-value transactional work that has historically been the bread and butter service of the business process outsourcing offering is now being automated by captive operations who are deploying enabling technologies. How is Genpact competing with these enabling technologies, if at all? And how are you seizing the opportunities to offer new technologies to your clients, either through partnering with technology providers or maybe acquiring technologies to add to a portfolio of services? And I'm curious to know as well how you're combating the potential of revenue loss that these enabling technologies are potentially presenting.
Great question, Susie. So first, we are a big proponent and user of enabling technology for both ourselves and our customers. And that intensity of that drive has only become much bigger and more over the last few years. We have done a bunch of acquisitions in different areas to have our own proprietary technologies where we believe that there was a white space in the market and having our own would be a competitive advantage. We also are a big believer that in areas, for example, like e-invoicing and stuff like that, where there are very well-established good players in the market, the bigger play is to partner with them and create larger values for our customers. And we have a bunch of those partnerships with some of the leading players in the market in many different areas. We actively take those to our customers. Many of the transformation journeys with the customers have very high components of leveraging technology along with, of course, a process redefinition and getting the operating model and the policies right, because technology by itself doesn't solve for the benefits. And we are very happy to, frankly, lose and have that risk of revenue of some of the transactional core pieces of work, which might have been just a result of inefficiencies in the system. Our belief in the finance and accounting space specifically is that the penetration levels are so low across a big organization's overall finance and accounting footprint in terms of both outsourcing and even in terms of their own shared service models, that we really don't have to hold on to core transaction processing or low-end transaction processing from a revenue source perspective. There's a lot more to do as you keep going up the value chain, A. B, the fact that there is automation happening, there is a whole fulfillment model which needs to wrap around that automation. And therefore, we ourselves are providing solutions with an automation built into the solution, and therefore the revenue for both the fulfillment as well as the automation continues to flow. And it's just a different revenue stream as opposed to deploying people. But overall, the cost to the customer has to obviously come down. And third, that the whole aspect of designing and optimization is becoming so much more important and so much higher that that itself opens up many more engagement opportunities with our customers. So we feel very comfortable in that trend, and we are actually pushing that trend very, very hard.
Okay, you talked a little bit about margin there and that you were happy to potentially sacrifice a little bit of margin on the transactional side. My question to you is that you clearly have huge facilities. You've got, I think it's something like 75 centres globally, 17,000 employees alone in the F&A part of your business. So huge facilities, thousands of people, clearly a huge overhead. With the pressure that there is in today's economy on margins and the pressure that's being put on your figures with the huge facilities and thousands of employees, what is the pressure that you see on pricing and the attraction of onshore delivery, and how are you looking to potentially redeploy your assets?
So the first answer to that is we have no current concern on redeploying assets, and pressure on infrastructure actually is the other way around, because we continuously need to have more infrastructure given the growth and the size that we are getting to. I actually think the question can be almost turned on its head. The scale gives us enormous leverage on overheads. And the comparison is not to a zero overhead structure. The comparison is to a smaller scale structure. And therefore, on any of those comparisons, we would come out actually very well, given the sheer economies of scale that we can generate, whether it's in technology, whether it's in infrastructure management, whether it's in actual people management practices, training models, almost the entire chain of activities that needs to go with people. I think if the question is, when we take on work from diverse different customer locations, some of which can therefore not be necessarily reutilized by them, how does that compare? Now, interestingly, the comparison, if you are taking it from low-growth countries, which are mostly the developed countries, still works out very, very favorable even with all the overheads, because our overheads obviously get leveraged and get benefits on economies of scale. And when you think of that comparison with fast-growing developing countries, then the customers themselves need more infrastructure and more support systems to cater to that growth. So you are replacing growth at a smaller scale with growth in a larger scale, and actually that should be economically advantageous. So we actually don't face that as a huge problem. Pricing is a different discussion. I think pricing continues to be very competitive in the market. There are always one or two situations where there are desperate players in the market who will undercut on pricing. However, this market gets driven far more by sustainability and reputation. And that's why if you see the finance and accounting market between, the three large players, including us, we share possibly more than half the market, as opposed to many of the other smaller players who are possibly willing to do it at much lesser price, because this is not just about a cost game. You cannot trust your books of accounts to just the lowest cost provider unless you are clear that your controllership compliance and then the overall value addition that you can get are significantly differentiated.
So, Shantanu, you talked a little bit about competitors there and how there are three of you in the tier one of business process outsourcers. How is Genpact adapting its business model to stay ahead of the competition and add more value to the client?
So we clearly recognize that the industry is shifting from a predominant logic of cost to a logic where cost is a necessary condition, but expertise is becoming the sufficiency condition. To that extent, therefore, if you look at our own financial model, we have been reorienting our investments into both front-end as well as support domain process expertise, technology expertise, and driving what we call our R&D, which is our frameworks like Smart Enterprise Process and analytics and stuff like that. So over the last 3 years, while our overall SG&A expenses as a percentage of revenue has stayed more or less at the same level, the expenses on our research and development and on front-end domain expertise has become far higher compared to all other G&A, where we are leveraging the economies of scale to drive deflation and drive down overall costs. So that's a very clear focus area for us in terms of investing. Even as an externally reported company, our guidance to our investors is that in the medium term, we are not looking at overall margin expansion, though we are going to keep driving down our general overhead costs, but we are going to keep investing it back into building the expertise for growth. So it's a very growth-oriented thesis with the bias on investing for expertise, which we believe is what will drive this industry.
My final question to you, Shantanu, comes down to the renewal rate of your clients. So you've clearly been in existence since 1997. That's 16 or so years, enough time to see a pattern as far as renewed contracts is concerned. As a percentage, how many clients look to renew with you?
Well, so far our history has been, close to 100%. I mean, there must have been a couple of contracts here and there, and to the extent I can recollect, it has more been driven by, some kind of M&A, and therefore, if some of our customer has got acquired by a company which has a completely different perspective on doing it themselves versus outsourcing kind of model, and maybe one or two cases where we have mutually decided not to sort of continue, for example, in a call center kind of situation. But in F&A, I would almost think it's close to 100%. Might not be exact 100, but it'll be close to 100%.
Final question to you, Shantanu. If you were going to leave two pieces of advice to a shared services director that's looking to outsource multiple or single F&A processes, what would those two pieces of advice be?
My first piece of advice is that outsource for expertise and not just for cost. The second piece of advice is that really think through what you need to outsource versus what you need to do in terms of a long-term model, and then decide on an implementation which is more contextual to the company's situation, culture, change management objectives, and stuff like that. as opposed to doing it on a piecemeal basis, on an ad hoc basis, because the ability to drive value through that partnership depends on how one works jointly on that long-term model.
Shantanu Ghosh, thank you very much indeed.